But access control is a Wild West. Everybody builds their own, and it felt like the next hard thing that we wanted to tackle for developers. People just say, you know what, I'm going to rely on the identity provider to do role management for me. That's a hard problem. What I'm about to demo is being able to put a entitlement system in front of a set of APIs.
Hey folks, today we are joined by Omri Gazitt from Aserto, who's going to talk about our new partnership with his company. He's the CEO of Aserto, and give us a little demo of their awesome integration to do things like RBAC and ABAC. But I'm going to let Omri introduce himself and tell us more about the awesome company he started. Hi, Omri.
Hey, Josh, great to be here. So a little bit about myself. I've been doing software for developers for probably 35 years now. This is my third startup. The first one went public. The second one didn't do so well. So as they say, the third one's a charm, Aserto. I spent a lot of time at Microsoft building software for developers. Josh, you and I, served on the same groups together,
Yeah.
working on web services. I was one of the co-founders of .NET as well as Azure. And in Azure, my teams built what became Azure Active Directory, and so it gave us a
Wow.
taste for identity and access. And the origin story of Aserto really is that we felt like 15 years in, we had solved identity. Like single
Yeah.
sign-on on the web is a thing. No one thinks twice about building their own authentication. You're going to use Auth0 or Clerk or Okta or Azure Active Directory or one of those things. But access control is a Wild West. Everybody builds their own, and it felt like the next hard thing that we wanted to tackle for developers. So that's why we started Aserto.
Awesome. So make it real for me, like as a novice to this space, like what kind of thing could I do with Aserto? Like what's a common scenario?
Yeah, so usually if you're building an app, a multi-tenant SaaS app, and it's more than just a consumer app. Your customers are businesses. You're going to have different people that have different roles, right? So those different roles will have different permissions. And usually any company starts with an admin role and a member role, right? So even there, you're doing some form of role-based access control. So at the very least, you need to make sure that certain users don't see the data or have functions in other tenants, right? Right off the bat, you already, through multi-tenancy, need to implement a permission model, an authorization model. So even at file new company, as soon as you solve login, you pick one of your login providers, you probably ought to start thinking about how you're going to go implement authorization. So oftentimes today, people just say, you know what, I'm going to rely on the identity provider to do role management for me. But
Sure.
that quickly runs out of room. Let me give you three examples of where we see requirements that quickly induce having a real authorization framework. The first one is if I have, kind of a viewer, kind of role, but it has to be at at more fine-grained levels of tenant management. So say
Mm.
my tenant has projects, and within those projects, it has teams. Within those teams, they have, particular items. If I want to go implement any kind of hierarchical, kind of permission management, that's a hard problem. And my existing facilities don't really work anymore. Another example is, these cross-cutting roles. A lot of SaaS happens to have tenants, and so Josh owns the Zuplo tenant, but
Mm.
maybe Josh's accountant has read access on certain amounts of data inside of that tenant. Take Carta, for example, or take Brex, or any one of those types of software where you have a cross-cutting role. You may have an attorney role, you may have an accountant role, you may have a bookkeeper role, and they may have limited permissions across different tenants. That's really hard to implement with just kind of a straight multi-tenant RBAC model. And a permission model, like a permission platform like Aserto, will help you solve that. And then a third scenario is sharing. If I have, let's say, something that looks like a Google Docs or a GitHub, where I have a document or a repository, then I want to be able to share. So Omri is an owner of a document. I want to make Josh a viewer of that document. How do you implement sharing? that's kind of the heart of what an authorization platform gives you. So those are three scenarios where you really want to adopt something off the shelf as opposed to have to roll out your own, because that's a lot of code, a lot of work, a lot of maintenance.
I was thinking exactly that, actually. I think we've probably all been there and written this spaghetti code ourselves and then come to regret it, managing it, realizing the the scenarios you didn't think through. So Aserto is this in a box, right? It's this as a service, essentially. Exciting, awesome. So I think you have a little demo for us, sort of showing the Zuplo integration. And given it's related to Zuplo, Zuplo is an API gateway, API management platform. This is ABAC and RBAC for APIs, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Exactly. So
Awesome.
when we think about authorization, there are a few different places that people want to do it. The most obvious place is in the backend service itself, right? So the
Hmm.
backend service wants to say, hey, right before I'm going to grant or deny access to a protected resource, I need to make a check call. I need to check whether Josh, the user, that's typically kind of a claim embedded in an access token. Like a JWT will have a subject claim, and the subject claim will be Josh. So that's the user. I want to know whether that user has this particular permission on this fine-grained resource that the application is about to either read or modify or delete or what have you. So that's a very common use case. But another use case that we encounter quite a bit is that you have teams that have lots of services, lots of APIs. They have a huge API surface area, and they're trying to manage whether users, perhaps they're external or maybe they're even internal users, have access to those particular APIs. And they want to be able to do fine-grained permission management on those APIs. So, for example, Josh may be in the engineering group, and he may have read permissions on all the get APIs for a particular system, but he doesn't really have permission to post or delete unless there's some kind of break the glass scenario where Josh is maybe on call and he needs to be able to go create new records in the support system, and therefore he needs to be able to invoke those APIs.
Cool.
Those are, I would say, classic API permissioning types of scenarios, and we've tried with Aserto to make that turnkey. So that's one of the solutions that we have. Obviously, fine-grained permission management for SaaS applications. But what I'm about to demo is just being able to put a entitlement system in front of a set of APIs.
Hmm. Let's take a look. I mean, let's
All right.
see it. And it sounds, it's a good setup.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
Okay, well, this looks familiar. I recognize this. That looks
Yeah,
like Zuplo.
this is the Zuplo portal. So what we have here is a project that's initialized with your reference to do OpenAPI spec. And it's important to note actually that both Zuplo and Aserto are OpenAPI native. So this is just an OpenAPI file, right? And what we want to do is add authorization for this particular API. Now, what we can do is we can go to the Aserto console and we can initialize the template that is the API authorization template. I already have that initialized, so I'm going to refrain from doing that again.
Okay.
But I can basically click on that policy, the API authorization policy, and I have a quick start here that shows me how to, for example, import an OpenAPI description for
Cool.
a service that I have. And this is, in fact, the Zuplo service. Let me crank the font here a little bit just so you can see. It's the same exact OpenAPI definition that we saw before in Zuplo. And I can
Awesome.
basically just paste that in here, call it to do Josh, give it a service name, click import, and here we have a set of endpoints that we automatically can generate some service descriptions for. I won't do that because we already have one that we've done, and I don't want to have two of them. But let's actually look at what happened here when we initialize this template. We have a model, first of all. The model basically defines things like services and endpoints and a set of permissions. I won't go through all these in detail. We can probably refer the audience to some documentation if they want to kind of get into the manifest in detail. But this is basically a YAML definition that defines a set of object types, relationships that are basically roles, and permissions. And the permissions basically have a permission algebra that says, here's how you can get that permission. So this is basically how a model works. Now, we also imported a set of objects. So there's a set of demo users. These are the Rick and Morty users. We all love Rick and Morty. So we have a set of users that correspond to the cartoon. And then we have a set of services that we imported. So we have the Pet Store API service. This is the famous Java, the Java example, Rick and Morty API, and then the To-Do List API. And that's the one that we're really interested in here. So the To-Do API has all of these endpoints, right? And it also has a set of groups that essentially entitle the members of those groups to have particular permissions on these endpoints. So, for example, the To-Do API deleters has access to all of the methods. Creators have access to all of the endpoints minus the deletes. Readers only have access to get APIs, and writers have gets and patches inputs. So that's kind of how we've arranged the kind of creating these groups, although this is completely customizable and you can do that in any way you want. So we have a to-do list API. Let's go actually look at users and how we've entitled them. Let's start with Rick, who's the evil genius. Of course, Rick can do everything, so naturally he's a member of the global deleters group. And the global deleters group is basically a roll-up of all the three different services that we have here. So basically, Rick can do everything on every service, as you'd expect from an evil genius. Let's go to the Morty user. Morty is the sidekick, and all he's entitled to is the Pet Store API creator. So he can't actually do anything on the to-do service directly. He's just entitled to invoke posts and puts and patches and gets on the Pet Store API. But we also have another group that he's a member of. If we go back to Morty here and take a look, he's a member of the editor group. And the editor group is a member of the viewer group. The viewer group happens to be a to-do list API reader. So through this nested hierarchy of groups, Morty is also entitled to execute all the gets on the to-do API. Does that make sense so far?
It does. Yeah, it's cool.
Fantastic. Let's go back to the Zuplo portal and do some things. So we're going to want to go create an authorization policy for some of these routes here. And I've already done that, but let me show you how easy it is to go do that within Zuplo. I can just click Add a Policy, then select Aserto Authorization. And all I have to do is fill in a set of options here. So these options all come from the Aserto console from the particular policy. We have a set of settings here, the instance name, the tenant ID, the authorizer API key. And so if we go back to Zuplo, these are basically, this is what the export the options need to look like in order to initialize this thing correctly to this particular tenant that I have. So if I go paste this, this is what all you need to do in Zuplo in order to now use Aserto to enforce your API authorization. So we've done that already. This is basically the same thing that I've already done, and I've added this policy to all 6 of the routes here. Right? So every one of them has an Aserto auth inbound.
And that's the same policy that you've just reapplied across every single route. You just created one policy in policies.json, exactly. And then you've applied it to all the routes. Okay.
That's right.
Yep.
We look at Aserto auth inbound. There's one of them, and it's active on all 6 routes.
Great.
Right? So we've already done that just to save a little bit of time. And so now I can go use the Zuplo tester. And I have an authorization header here. I've kind of cheated a little bit. I've created these, synthetic headers to be able to, get bearer tokens for Rick and Morty. The way I've gotten these, these bearer tokens is simply through the Zuplo API key service. So I created 2 consumers, one for Morty, one for Rick, and each one of them basically has an API key here. So that's what I'm stuffing in this authorization header. So let's go back to the code and let's go try to invoke this thing. The first thing that we're going to want to do is try to invoke, the get API using either Morty or Rick. That should work because both of them are viewers of the service. If we look at the logs here, we'll see that we were able to go, get a a decision from Aserto that is allowed is true. And if we look at what we sent Aserto, we basically sent this particular payload,
Hmm.
and we got back, a positive response of 200.
Nice.
Now let's go do something more interesting, which is let's pick the delete API. And the delete API, if we want to go test that, will work with Rick. So let's go use Rick's bearer token here. And as we can see, we get a 200 OK here, same kind of logs that we've seen. And then now let's use Morty's bearer token. And of course, Morty, since he's just a viewer on this service, shouldn't be able to delete. I'm going to go click test here, and I get a 403 forbidden. The request was not authorized. And of course, in the logs, I can see that Aserto returned a false. Now, let's say that we want to go entitle Morty. This is a break the glass scenario. Morty really needs to delete it to do. Let's go back to the directory. Let's go see how easy it is to do that. So we'll go to the endpoint that we want to go check out. It's a delete endpoint. It's this one over here. And all we have to do is basically make Morty an invoker of that service,
Hmm.
that endpoint. So we're going to add Morty here. And we'll go back to Zuplo and then click test. And that works. We get a 200 OK. And again, if as soon as we're done, Morty is no longer, breaking any glass, Morty can't delete to-dos anymore, I'll delete that relationship. I'll go test that again with Morty, and we get the 403 forbidden. So that's how easy it is to, kind of administer entitlements.
That's
And
awesome. And just
yeah,
quickly, it seems really quick as well. So this is a real live demo, right? This is really calling the Aserto service in line with the API and doing the authorization check.
exactly. And from a deployment perspective, we recommend that you deploy an authorizer, a Topaz authorizer, which is Topaz is our open source project. So if you look at Topaz, it's just basically completely open source. It gives you all of the goodies that you saw here in the Aserto hosted platform. What I demoed here is against the Aserto hosted platform, but Topaz can run in on your side of the cloud and give you really blazing fast authorization.
Hmm.
We say authorization typically in a millisecond, hundreds of microseconds or a millisecond. It's fast, it's flexible, it supports ABAC, RBAC, REBAC, and it's real time. And what we believe in authorization, it's got to be fine grained, it's got to be policy based. I showed you some of the policy, and it's got to be real time. You have to be able to make real time decisions. And the architecture is, you import all of your data, your identity provider data into Topaz. You set it up with a policy that you store in version and Git, and Topaz does the rest. And it actually will write out decision logs so that you can have a record of every decision that
Hmm.
the authorizer made for you.
That is awesome. So if you go back to the Aserto console for a
Yeah.
second,
Mm-hmm.
so you were making some of these changes here in the UI. Are there other ways a business might modify these relationships and add new members? Can this all be automated through an API or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything that you can do with UI, you can do through a CLI or through an API. We support both gRPC and REST. So, for example, the directory here, we could decide to set a relationship between a subject and an object, and so everything is REST native, so to
Mm.
speak, and gRPC native. In addition, for the directory, we also support GraphQL. So, for example, if I
Wow.
want to get all the users that I have in the system, here are the users. Here are the 5 users that I have. If I just want to see, say, instead of the properties, I don't want to see the properties here. There's just simply a GraphQL call. And of course, every one of these scenarios has a GraphQL equivalent. So, for example, if I want to do a check whether Morty has access to a particular endpoint, I want to say, let's say the delete pet ID, he shouldn't be able to invoke that because he's only a creator on the pet store service. Even cooler scenarios are if I want to say, find all of the endpoints that Morty can access right now. So let's go click on that. We can see that he can access all the pet store endpoints that are posts, gets, or deletes. Let let me go through these. And of course, he should be able to access the to-do set as well. So there's a to-do get B1 API to do. So interspersed here are the ones on the to-do service. And vice versa. We could ask the exact opposite question. Let's go find all the users that can invoke the to-do, the delete to-dos API. And that would be only Rick. Now, again, if we entitle Morty, we would get that Morty in that list as well. And everything here, you can copy as curl
Nice.
and go here. Let me make this bigger. Make a terminal here a little bit bigger and paste this in. And here we have the same exact query. So everything is very, very developer forward, developer centric.
I love it. I mean, it's pretty clear. We often talk about people launching API programs that we call it the three pillars. Authentication, protection, and documentation. And that's just the very, very beginning. Like, you can't launch without that. It's obvious that right next you're going to need to really think about your authorization strategy. So a partnership between Aserto and Zuplo makes a ton of sense. This is a great demo, just how easy it is to achieve everything and how well integrated the two products seem to be playing. So thank you very much for leaning in with us today, Omri, giving us the demo, partnering with us on shipping that awesome policy.
Yeah,
Anything you want to add?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a pleasure working with your team. I think we have some really nice documentation that your team wrote about integrating Aserto into Zuplo and vice versa. We have some nice materials and videos that we've recorded on how to do that as well. So between all of these, I'm sure we can put those as links in the notes of the recording for people that want to get started. I think you can get from zero to like full authorization for all your APIs in probably half an hour. And I'm being, I think that's even, I think you can do it in even less. So,
I agree.
Really, really very quickly.
We just demonstrated it almost, right? At 22 minutes and a lot of chit chat. So it's definitely possible to beat that record. So with Zuplo, folks can go sign up at portal.zuplo.com. How do they get started with Aserto?
Yeah, all we do is go to www.aserto.com, click sign up, and away you go. You can sign up either with a GitHub or with a user ID and password, email and password. And you have a free tier, just like with Zuplo. So you can go play with it to your heart's content. And once you get ready for serious projects and getting things into production, give us a call and we'll help you with everything you need to create what we call fine-grained, policy-based real-time authorization.
Amazing. So you heard it here first, folks. Go try it. Go sign up. Thanks so much, Omri. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Josh. Likewise.